James 1, chapter
Hello.
1, verse 1. Yeah.
Here we are. This is like the first time we're doing a new episode.
Oh, okay. I shouldn't have started like that then. But go on.
Hello, we're back.
Yeah.
You probably listened to us yesterday, but that's all right. No, you're really conscientious people.
I'm not used to this new method
No, this
already.
new method. Well, this is only the sort of second time I'm doing it. So
All right. Okay. So we're starting again.
it's a new episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to the Bible. Wait, what?
Yes. All right. And we're talking about James chapter 1.
We are doing James chapter 1 today.
Yes. My name's Jeanie. This
Hello,
is
Jeanie.
Pastor Rohan. Yeah, we're
Hello,
sitting down
everybody.
here discussing this most fabulous book.
Yeah, fabulous book. Most fabulous.
Most fabulous book that just on verse 2 makes me want to basically throw it away, to be honest.
Yes, well, we were chatting earlier on with Amanda and she was saying it's her least favourite verse in the whole Bible, so there you go.
It is.
Yeah, it's a confronting verse, isn't it?
I'll start with verse 1 here, where he says, I, James, am a slave of God, and the Master Jesus, writing to the 12 tribes scattered to kingdom come. Hello. I'm reading from the Message. Why
Yes,
does
you
he
are.
call himself a slave?
Well, I think that's probably partly, let's assume, as we said in the introduction yesterday, assuming that this is James, the brother of Jesus, I think it's important and it's significant that he could have creds.
What?
He could have called on his credit as a family member. He could have had some severe credentials.
Okay.
Yeah, he could have gone, hey, by the way, listen to me. You know, I grew up with him. If anyone knows Jesus, I know him. And he could have called on that, but he didn't. He willingly, even though he was Jesus' half brother, was willing to say, oh, hey, I'm a servant. I'm a slave. I'm
humbling
myself. So this is him doing the exact opposite of using his street cred.
So he's humbling himself before God, Jesus, and his audience?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I think is modeling how we should all live.
It's very different to this selfies generation and the influencer generation.
Yeah. And influencer pastor generation.
Yes, where he might write, I, James, have 1 million followers.
Yes.
And I am famous for being the half brother of Jesus.
Nope,
and
none of
I
that.
have rights.
Yep, none of that. He's not asserting any of that. Now, we'll see in Acts 15, he's still confident in his leadership. He's the one who composes the
church
letter.
leader,
He's a church
isn't
leader.
he?
So he's the one who composes the letter to send with Paul and Barnabas back about the decisions made about what Gentiles had to do and not do in terms to be saved. And, you know, the 4 things it said. They have to, you know, not eat meat sacrificed to idols, abstain from sexual immorality, a couple of other things they said. But the good thing was they didn't have to get circumcised. And he was the one who kind of issued that after a conversation. So he's comfortable in his leadership. But in this context, he's not trying to assert his leadership under any grounds other than that he's a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Can I take from this that what really matters is how we see ourselves in the sight of God and the people that we serve?
Nice.
Yeah?
I like that. I like that. How we see ourselves.
How we see ourselves.
And the people we serve.
Yeah. So like James, we're called to be servants or slaves of God, to God.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we
And to
serve
the sheep,
others to the
we
sheep.
shepherd,
We're
yeah.
others focused rather than ourselves focused when we're in life. We're leaders, but all of us.
Is it servant leadership?
It's servant leadership, isn't it?
Do you know a bit about that?
We've learned a bit, haven't we? We did a little bit of that in Bible college. Yeah, that's right. That's the heart of Jesus, the one who doesn't try to boast about our credentials, but we lead for the sake of others, not for the sake of ourselves. None of us I don't get that perfect, but that's my heart.
I had a joke there, but I'm not going to say it. I will say instead, this is like James.
You got me intrigued.
Yeah.
What was your joke?
No, James like Jesus was washing the feet of the disciples. James in this way it's an encouraging. If somebody's sending me a letter and he humbles themselves before me, it's setting me up to listen to what he's saying. And I would feel like I should be humbled because James is washing my feet.
Yes,
in a
very good.
way.
And Paul does the same thing. It's a standard greeting. Paul, a bond slave, a slave of Jesus Christ. So he uses the same kind of language. Which is essentially gospel language, isn't it? We're not putting ourselves forward as someone special. We're recognising we're all fellow servants of the Lord on this journey together.
And the letter starts off well there. Great.
That bit was okay, wasn't it?
He's humbled himself.
Verse 2 goes downhill in a hurry.
Verse 2 is a killer. Consider it, other books will say joy.
Mm-hmm.
This one says, consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. I just want to throw the book in the bin.
That's the bit right there where you go, what the?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
What does he mean by that? Consider it all joy when troubles come.
Well, he'll answer it for us.
Or what? Should I keep reading?
Yeah.
Okay. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colours. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way. Does that answer
That's it. So that was verses 3 and 4, which answer why he can say, consider it pure joy. Why can we consider it pure joy? It's because that testing of our faith will actually produce godliness and Christ-likeness in us. I wish it wasn't that way.
Yes, you and me both.
But it is. And that's the message he's trying to get across. But that's the same in every arena of life. We don't become... No, it's the old no pain, no gain thing. Whether it's in the gym or with diet or whatever, you're not going to see positive growth that counteracts human selfishness without pain, without suffering, without hardship, because there's going to have to be a sense in which we choose not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We choose not to take for ourselves. Whenever we take for ourselves, it will lead to it can lead to easy and quick success or sense of relief. Maybe that's a better word, relief, but it's not going to bring lasting, sustained endurance and change, because that requires pain. That requires stretching.
The Olympics have recently been on, and I think about it, all the amount of training. Let's think about the 100 sprinters, 100-meter sprinters, not 100 people sprinting.
100-meter sprinters.
The amount of pain and effort they go to, torn muscles, ripped Achilles or whatever, and then they either win or they don't win. Let's say for this example, they do win. What was worth the medal? I think the pain makes the medal worth winning.
Yeah. Yes.
Does that make sense?
It does. Jesus says the same thing. Talks about no mother, they endure pain, but when the child is born, they forget the pain.
Oh, yeah. James does say that, doesn't he? I don't know how he said that because he was a man, right? But I'm pretty sure he could just – he imagined.
He imagined
Yes.
forgetting the pain. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the principle is that you endure hardship for the benefit on the other side of hardship. And that's what these are people who are suffering a degree of persecution, as we talked about it in the introductory episode. They're suffering a degree of persecution. Right off the bat, he's saying, hey, guys, don't give up, because it's going to produce something if you just keep turning up. Your faith, he says in this version, you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. And that's just makes common sense, that if you stretch in the physical realm with your exercise, you'll grow capacity. And it's the same with your faith. It's like Pastor Phil Pringle says, faith is like a muscle that we need to stretch, and it's actually in the breaking, getting them in gymnastic, in working in the gym, you're actually causing micro tears in the muscles, which is actually causing it to heal stronger. And it's the same with faith. Sometimes it feels like faith muscles just been ripped completely, yes. But God is able to actually stretch us so that we can do a David and go from fighting the lion to fighting the bear to fighting Goliath.
I love what you just said, but it is so hard in the moment when you are under persecution to, what's his words here, consider it a sheer gift.
Yes.
It takes faith to be able to get through those moments.
Sure does, Jeanie.
And I think you need to learn a tiny little bit of faith before you're tested, have a little bit more faith in the bigger trial, and then so on and so on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but it always feels like it's a lot of faith at that time, because we're always being tested to the capacity that we're at that time.
Oh, everybody wants to throw the towel in.
Yeah, I think that's the point. He's recognizing that, and it does seem harsh, but if we take a step back out of it, if we think, what I've often said to people is, you might feel like you want to throw in the towel right now. I've had those days. I might feel like it's just not worth it, or I'm not getting anywhere, or I'm not the right person, or whatever. But if you think back to the times when you felt that way in the past and go, hey, God brought me through that thing, and I hated every minute of it, but if I had to go through it again to learn what I've learned, I'd go through it again, because I became a bigger, more Christ-like person as a result of that test. And then that reminds me that I'm back in this situation again. Yeah, it's sucky, but God's still working now the same way he was working last time around.
You know what gives me strength or resilience, I suppose, to get through testing times is when I look back at those times when I did throw the towel in, and there were many of those moments. They're moments that I deeply regret. there was a lesson that I should have learnt, but I walked away from.
And what's the end result of walking away from that lesson?
The end result? Well, I didn't learn the lesson and I felt like a real loser, because you're weak. You think it's easier to get out of. You think you're going to grow when you throw in the towel, but you actually don't.
No, that's right. And God in his gracious, I said this.
Missed opportunities.
It's a missed opportunity.
So many missed opportunities.
Yeah, that's right. And in God's economy, I said this from the pulpit here a few weeks back here at Thirroul, that talking about this thing and saying, look, tests aren't designed to pass for us to fail. Tests are designed for us to pass.
Yes.
And God in his infinite grace, he doesn't, if we throw in the towel, he's not down on us. He just, in his grace, will allow us to sit the test again. And I feel like, hey, I don't want to sit tests more than once if I can.
That's another way to look at it.
I'd rather stick it out and learn the result than have to go around the mountain and learn this test again in 3 years' time.
Yes, like if God really wants you to learn that lesson and you fail in this time, it's going to come back.
That's right. We have to reset the exam.
Yeah. And some of us can spend our whole lives learning the same lesson.
Yes, and that's sad. I often say this. I say, someone might say I've been a Christian 20 years, but really, if you look at the fact they kept throwing in the towel and kept dropping, when they could have pushed through, it's more that they've been a Christian 1 year 20 times over.
Yeah, I see that.
Because just they haven't stuck at that growth process, and that's what James is encouraging the people to do here. Stick at it, stay consistent, because in the end, you're going to become a more Christ-like person. You'll develop these Christ-like characteristics, which will sustain you and ultimately enable you to be more effective in His work in other people's lives.
I think about that. The boat, we've talked about this in a previous podcast, the disciples in the boat and the storms all around, and Jesus is walking on the water. That's what a lot of these trials are like. You're in the boat, the storm is there, you just have to hang on.
Yep.
Hang on and just keep your eyes on the prize,
Hang on until Jesus walks on the water beside you. Yep.
Yeah, because trials do come.
Yep.
And some of them are really vicious. We just keep looking up.
Well, it's interesting because he goes on in this very chapter, and he like a couple of verses later, verse 6, he says, when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Don't waver, for a person divided loyalty is unsettled, like a wave that, as a wave of the sea is blown and tossed by the wind.
Ah, there you go.
So that's because he's using a metaphor there to explain what life is like. It feels like you're just being tossed from.
Perhaps he's even remembering that moment.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't in that moment, but he would have heard about it.
Yes.
Yeah. There's another way here to understand this. A literal translation of the Greek actually reads, all joy, count it, which could be paraphrased as count every happiness when you endure trials.
I see.
So like James wants his readers to focus on the happiness that they have had in their lives and happiness on the future as you're going through the trial. Like remember what God has done in that moment. That will help you to get through this moment.
So it's not that the trial is a source of joy, but that you're leveraging previous and future joy as a source of strength to endure the trial.
Yes.
I like that.
Yep.
That's the whole concept of using monuments in the Old Testament, testifying to what God has done. The whole idea of the Israelites crossing the Jordan and then setting up a pillar of monument so that later on generations could look back and they could go, that's when God brought us across the Jordan River. That's when God delivered us to Passover. That's when God brought us out. So that we leverage God's previous high points in our lives and the future high points, which is Hebrews talks about Jesus for the joy set before him endured the cross. It wasn't like, oh, great, I'm going to the cross. How exciting. In fact, we know in the Gethsemane, it was the opposite of that. He was absolutely heartbroken, but for the joy on the other side, that sustained him through the time.
Yes.
I think that's I've never heard that before. That's a really good way to read this.
Yeah, so always count the good times you've had. No one can take that from you.
And the good times that lie before you as well.
And that lie before you. And I remember this story, and I know it's a person of faith. I don't know if they were Christian or if they were Jewish, but they were under deep persecution, like physical. It may have been in the Holocaust. I can't remember because I was listening to a sermon and it was mentioned in this. And the person said, no matter what the people did against me, they can't take the good times in my life that I've had, and they cannot take my attitude.
Mm. Yeah, that would be a Holocaust story for those. In fact, sociologists and psychologists tell us they're the ones who survived.
Yeah, it's
the ones who
probably
actually
one of
got
those
to that point where they went, there's nothing that these people they have no power over me because I've already got those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that's a good way to view life. It's what will keep us going during those hard times, is realizing, well, even if I lost everything, I'm going to be okay because I've got Jesus and those good memories and so on. Yeah.
And so don't focus on the suffering. And that I've written here Job 2:10, which says, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?"
Yep.
And
even James will quote Job in his book somewhere.
Yeah, it proved he was faithful to God. His response proved he was faithful to God.
His response is, whether it's good or bad, I trust God.
Trust God.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Trials refine and strengthen, as you know.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he talks there about consider it pure joy when you face trials and tribulations or trials and testings of every kind. And I think scholars say that James is actually referring to two different types. There's an extrinsic and there's an intrinsic there. So
Sorry, what does that mean?
Outside or inside. So trials are something that come upon us from externally. Temptations, it says trials and temptations. Temptations are something that come from within us. And James will say that in later chapters, that our sin comes from our inner sinful nature, which when we're tempted, we give in to that. And then he actually uses another progression. It leads to death in the end. Probably James 4 or James 5. I think we'll probably get to that later. But it's that process of one is coming from our own sinful nature when we give into it. The other one, consider it pure joy when you face trials, external things, because that is actually producing character in you. Even if the devil is bringing those, even if the powers of darkness are allied against us to keep us small, the devil's plans, God will redeem them and use them to make us bigger, more effective people for his kingdom.
That's what we hope, isn't it?
That's the goal.
Talk to me about the word perseverance. It's not in this translation, but it's probably
endurance in this.
Endurance.
The perseverance of your faith, I think is what you're talking about, is it?
Yeah.
For this version says, you'll know that your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. Are you after the word endurance there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I guess it's kind of like that whole stretching thing. It's like if you stretch a muscle and then when it contracts again, it'll never go back to where it was. It's now more flexible. It's got more stretch in it. And each time you stretch a muscle and then let it contract, it's got more flexibility in it. I think that's how to see faith. That's why Pastor Phil says it's like a muscle that we use. It actually does grow in capacity only by being put through trial. So, the disciples ask the Lord, increase our faith, Jesus. And Jesus is going to use examples to explain that faith is increased through testing. Patience. Lord, increase our patience. How are we going to get our patience increased? Through having our
don't
patience
pray those
tested.
prayers.
Exactly.
Okay. That's the advice here.
It's a law of God's kingdom that things get stronger through adversity.
And perseverance too. It's a similar thing. Endurance, perseverance. To me, I think of it as, in the sense, hold your ground.
Yeah.
Hold your ground, stand there. Like a soldier, I guess. In the Bible, you hear about the watches on the night. In Nehemiah, I think.
Could be Nehemiah.
Building the temple.
Yeah, building the wall. Yep.
Yeah, stand your ground. Or if you're in a battle like a soldier, your endurance is that you can stand there.
Yep.
Withstanding.
And the whole Ephesians 6, after you've done everything, keep standing. Stand firm then with the belt and all the armor of God. That's that whole concept of I love it. Perseverance sometimes is not pushing forward. It's just standing your ground.
And I think that's a lot of what people experience in their Christian faith. It's like if I can just stand in this moment, if I just stand on the word of God, and I think that's what God is asking us, just stand still and what is it? Be still and know that I am God.
Yeah. And it's not that easy to do for all kinds of reasons. One, we think it depends upon us, or one, can we trust God to come through because it's, 59 seconds, it's 1 second to midnight sort of thing. Yes. But that is it. It's just stand firm.
Stand firm. Hold your ground.
Hold your ground.
And apparently if we do that, we'll be mature and complete.
That's
not lacking anything.
That's a good promise. Mature and complete, not lacking anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got this note here. The trial isn't the end. Perseverance isn't the goal. These both bring person to the spiritual maturity, but the goal is actually perfect character, mature, holy, and righteous in the eyes of God.
Yes, I like that. So I would say the goal is Christ's likeness, is being conformed to the image of Christ. And the way to be conformed to the image of Christ is by being tempted to not be conformed to the image of Christ, or tested.
Tested. And so if we're under persecution, how would I know that I am looking like Christ in that moment?
I think that James will answer some of those things in the rest of the book.
Oh, so should we keep reading?
Maybe we should keep reading. Yes, he will. He'll talk. Ultimately, it's Christian character. It's not just, I'm going to stand defiant against the dark powers of this world. James is going to say things like, it's actually more than that. It's proactive love. He'll say something
like fruits of the Spirit.
The fruit of the Spirit. He'll actually say, anyone who does not, who knows the thing that is right to do and doesn't do it is a sinner, is what James will say somewhere in one of the next few chapters. So that's called the sin of omission. And we Christians, we're just going to stand our ground, we're going to stand our ground. And James would actually say, unless you're proactively loving your neighbor, unless you're proactively living out your faith, you're actually in the sin of omission. And so one of the best ways to stand your ground is to become like Christ and live his way on the earth.
Sounds reasonable, but very difficult.
Yes, it does. We need the grace of the Lord Jesus and his Spirit to be with us to do that.
Okay, I'll keep reading here. If you don't, in verses 5 to 8 or beyond, if you don't know what you're doing, pray to the Father. He loves to help.
This is the whole wisdom thing. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God.
You'll get his help and won't be condescended to when you ask for it. Ask boldly, believingly, without a second thought. People who worry their prayers, which I imagine means repeating the same thing over and over again, worry your prayers.
Yeah, so what I'm just trying to think.
They're like wind-whipped waves.
Yeah, so it's like people who doubt, I think it says in other versions. Yes, but I like that, worry their prayers, as if to say, oh God, please come through, please come through. Will you come through? And it becomes a self-perpetuating prophecy of negativity as opposed to faith in the supernatural power of God.
Well, he sort of says something slightly different here as well. Don't think you're going to get anything from the master that way, adrift at sea, keeping all your options open. So would worry be, I'm going to pray to this God, I'm going to pray to that God as well?
Yeah,
Worrying your prayers is like, I'm going to scattergun approach to...
Could be. Well, he's talking to Jews, so I think the tension for these guys might have been to revert back to just trusting in Mosaic law, trusting in pure Judaism to be their source of salvation as opposed to in Christ. It's hard. We're being persecuted because we're not labelled as a Jew anymore. Now we're in this Christian sect. It would be easier to go back and take the easy road. And I think that maybe that's what he's talking to here. And how do we do that? Well, sometimes it is easier to worry than to stand in faith, because it's our natural tendency to focus on the things that we don't have.
Worrying also gives purpose. I know that sounds very strange.
No, I hear.
But it's like, if I just keep thinking this through and through and through, maybe it'll get somewhere. Yeah. Or sometimes people might feel justified to be worried. They might feel... can you see what I'm saying?
I think I hear what you're saying, because you said worrying gives purpose. I think that's a really good example of what happens. It's like it all depends upon us. It's worrying, going, what am I going to have to do? How am I going to get through this? And it's like it's a lack of faith and trust in Jesus bringing us through this.
Yeah, like how can I answer these problems? How can I fix it? How can I do this myself?
Yeah, and I'm very guilty of that. I don't find it easy to trust God because I feel responsible.
Yes. It's hard to down tools, Right, I'm going to stand in this moment.
Yep.
I'm going to put down everything I have. I'm going to down my tools.
I've got nothing left to give, Lord. I've got no more tools.
I'm going to ask boldly and believingly without a second thought.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And that's what he's encouraging us to do. And intuitively, we think that actually sounds like less work, to be honest. But it's not easy.
And as Jews, they knew the scriptures. They had these thousands of years of stories behind them where God has proven himself true and has come through in the moments, even at sometimes the last minute.
Yep.
And in extraordinary ways they could never have imagined.
No, it's true. Yep. They've seen God move, therefore they need to trust in that again.
Keep going here. Mm-hmm. When down and outers get a break, cheer. And when the arrogant rich are brought down to size, cheer. This seems almost unchristianly. Why would you cheer when an arrogant person is brought down to size?
Oh,
I don't know.
see. Yeah,
But
okay.
prosperity is as short-lived as a wildflower, so don't ever count to it. You know that as soon as the sun rises, pouring down its scorching heat, the flower withers, its petals wilt, and before you know it, that beautiful face is a barren stem. What poetry.
It is very well written there, Eugene Peterson.
Well, that's a picture of the prosperous life. At the very moment everyone is looking on in admiration, it fades away to nothing. Anyone who meets a testing challenge head on and manages to stick it out is mighty fortunate. For such persons loyally in love with God, the reward is life and more life. What's he saying here? Is he saying no, what is he saying? Answer the question. I don't know.
He's saying, he's talking about rich and poor, and he'll pick up that theme elsewhere as well. And I think it seems to be, because he's not saying having money is evil. I think that's the first thing we need to realize. It's not wrong to be rich. But I think maybe he's picking up on what Jesus says is it's hard for the rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. That there are testings, there are temptations that will come upon those who are wealthy to rely on their own ability or to look down on others because I'm a self-made man and you're not. And that can lead to this arrogance thing. So I think he's trying to bring balance and equality back here because he says, you know, God honors the humble and he humbles the rich. And I think it's just an equality thing. It's just
Is that why you should cheer? Because the arrogant rich are being humbled?
Yeah, that's quite a strong way to put it. That almost
It
sounds
is.
antagonistic to the values of God, which
Yeah,
is
it does.
champion the one who's brought down. Although there is a sense of justice in that. You see that in the book of Revelation. You know, we rejoice when the unjust people are humbled by God.
Well, the key word I think is arrogant
Yeah, I
rich.
think
It's not
that's right.
just
It's not
rich,
It's-
arrogant
yeah,
rich.
because in this version it says those who are rich should boast that God has humbled them.
That's
So,
probably a better way to say it.
So he's saying that if you're boasting in yourself, whether that's money or power or success, influence, if you're boasting in yourself, that ultimately will lead to destruction because, as he says, it could be here today and gone tomorrow. The hot sun rises and the flowers fall away. In the same way, the rich or the powerful, you never know. It could be riches to rags, just as easily as it can be rags to riches. You never know what tomorrow holds. So don't hold to those things as the source of your boasting. It's going to be dangerous to do that. It's going to be unhealthy for you and for those around you.
It's a strange paragraph, I think, that one.
I think you'll find that a lot of these passages of James, I always find it hard. The thing with James is he seems to blur the lines a lot. And it's like, I wish I knew the context of exactly what he's thinking of. I get the impression there's a story or he's heard something or some examples in his head when he's written this down, and I can't quite always work out what that is. I'm left to sort of second guess what did he mean when he said this? Who was he talking about? I assume he's talking about he's heard of or aware that there are rich people who are throwing their weight around in the church. And there are people in the church that are favouring the rich over the poor, that kind of thing.
It like Proverbs, they seem quite disconnected. This seems disconnected to me to the
Yes,
verses
it does.
before
It seems
it.
to say two different things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
I think what I've come to with James, Jeanie, is that I'm actually okay with that. It doesn't have one continuous flow of thought like I see in many of the other writings. It's like James has just jumped from one point to another. More like when you read the Proverbs and you go, what does that proverb have to do with this proverb? Nothing. A little bit like the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus just points to a whole lot of Christian behaviours, but they're not all linked together. He seems to just change and go from one thing to another. So think of it like the Sermon on the Mount. It's like a textbook. You said it in the introduction. It's like a textbook for how to behave like a Christian. And it looks like you would assume at times when it should all flow together. It doesn't. He's just moved on to another point.
Yep. I get that. It also seems sometimes he brings it back as well. Like he points back to verses that he's written or
Multiple
or
times.
statements. Yeah. It doesn't flow correctly.
No,
as you
it doesn't
said.
flow correctly. Sometimes he'll be talking about rich and poor in chapter 1 and then he'll pull it up again in chapter 3.
Yeah.
He just seems to, they seem disconnected. And either he's incredibly brilliant and I have never been able to work out what their connections are, or he's just much more just writing snippets. But I don't think it matters. I think if we just treat each phrase on its own merit and apply it to our life, we can learn a lot from it. It's like wisdom literature. We can learn a lot from it.
There was something that I wanted to read about this, but I didn't get to, which is it shows you how they all do link, things do link, and how they do point back but I didn't get to read
Didn't
it.
get to read it. No.
That's for another day.
I suspect that
Yeah.
that's the case. I suspect with all the ancient writings that they were very cleverly written, and that even though he's got about 12 main points he makes throughout the 5 chapters, and although those 12 main points, some of them are the same thing repeated 2 or 3 different times that seem disconnected, I imagine there's some kind of very clever story arc that links
That's
them
what
all
it is.
together.
He repeats the same thing, like
Yeah.
I guess like a hammer. Like
Yeah.
if you didn't get it once, you get it twice.
I think that's kind of how it is.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So just go to verse 12 here. Anyone who meets a testing challenge head on and manages to stick it out is mighty fortunate. For such persons, loyally in love with God, the reward is life and more life. Is this one of the Sermon of the Mount moments?
I wonder if it's, I'm wondering if it is, without having them all in front of me. I don't have all those references in front of me. It mentions in my version the crown of life, and I've got a feeling that that is a reference to the book of Proverbs, which it also is heavily linked to. James is leveraging Matthew and the book of Proverbs. Have you got anything in front of you about that?
I've got something.
Yeah, tell me.
But I don't have the verse
Let me
reference.
see if I can.
But if you don't know this, then you need to go back to Bible college because you
Okay.
have to get this. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because
the
having
Beatitudes.
stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who trust in
So
him.
that's Paul, is it?
Paul.
That's
Yeah.
Paul saying
Okay.
that. Yes.
I knew you'd get it.
Yeah, that's
why
Paul saying that. But I think it's linked to the Beatitudes as well.
Right.
You
Okay.
know, blessed are they when people persecute you, and all, and you know, so I think you'd find there's a link there to Jesus teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. But you're right, Paul talks about the crown of life a couple of times.
Yep. In 1 Corinthians 9:25, actually, I've got it. Oh,
Yep.
the crown of life is a laurel wreath given as crowns to the victors in athletic contests.
That's correct.
In the
It
Greco-Roman
doesn't
world.
last.
Yeah.
So there is a link. I've just looked it up. There is a link while you're looking to Proverbs, which I thought there was. I thought there was Proverbs 3. Let me see if I can find the link. 11 and 12. Proverbs 3, 11 and 12. Let's see if it's... My dear child, don't reject the Lord's discipline and don't be upset when he corrects you, for the Lord corrects those who loves you, just as a father corrects a child. Sorry, that does not make any sense to me.
It sounded good though.
Sounded good. I mean, that's
I was
more a
going
link
with
to
it.
that's more a link to Romans 12 perseverance there. But I don't know where that came up from. The scholar got that one wrong.
The idea here really is that blessing is associated with God's protection.
Yes, from the hardship or through the hardship, through the test.
Through it.
Yeah.
Provided you continue to trust.
Yeah, staying the course. Yep.
Stay the course. Stand your ground.
Yep.
Remember the good times.
Remember the
sorry.
good times.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff out of that for what it's like in this opening chapter of James. Yep.
Yeah. Don't let anyone under pressure to give in to evil. Hang on, let me read that again. Don't let anyone under pressure to give in to evil say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
God
if you're
is
under
trying
pressure to
to-
give in,
God is trying. Oh, don't let anybody who's under pressure
under pressure.
say, God is trying to trip me up,
yes.
because God is impervious to evil and puts evil in no one's way. The temptation is to give in to evil. The temptation to give in comes from us and only us. We have no one to blame but the leering, seducing flare of our own lust. Lust gets pregnant and has a baby.
It's in this
Sin.
chapter I was referring to. Yes.
Sin grows up to adulthood and becomes a real killer. That's verses 13 to 15.
Yes, I thought it was later on, but that's the stuff I'm talking about.
Okay.
Where he's now contrasting. This is like a second process. He's talking about a process up further that says the testing of your faith produces perseverance. This one, he's saying temptation will actually ultimately lead to death if you give in to it. So it says in this version, temptation comes from our own evil desires, which entice us and drag us away. Verse 15, these desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death.
Gotcha.
And that's what he's saying. So whether it's an external trial or an internal thing, don't give in to it. Persevere. Stand your ground.
He even says it. So, my dear friends, don't get thrown off course. Every desirable and beneficial gift comes out of heaven.
Yes.
So, evil doesn't come from God. Gifts come from God. And the gifts are rivers of light cascading down from the Father of light. There's nothing deceitful in God, nothing two-faced, nothing fickle. He brought us to life using the true word, showing us off as the crown of all his creatures.
Wow, that's deep. It's a deep way to put it.
Crown. Sometimes you have to think about that. Humans are meant to be the crown of all his creatures. And we really don't look like that often, do we?
We're the opposite of that, sadly.
Yeah, we are.
But that's the vision that James has for these Christian Jews that he's writing to, that they would be his prized possession, or they would be the crown that shows off his glory to the world.
It's good to hear that kind of thing when you're under persecution, when you feel awful and somebody says to you, hang on a minute, you're actually crown creature.
And it also
the crowned
challenges me to go, how am I conducting and behaving myself in the world when I'm under persecution? Because am I making the grounds for persecution worse because I am operating out of the same sinful heart that brings death that those that are persecuting me are? Or am I going to operate out of Christ's values, which we'll see laid out in the next 4 chapters, things like taming the tongue? Am I going to be able to tame the tongue or tame what I write on my keyboard? You know, those kind of things, because they will ultimately...
Or with your thumbs.
Or with my thumbs, exactly. Because those things have the power to bring death or bring life. And if I'm going to be a James kind of, the follower that James is asking for, it's a person who looks differently and acts differently in persecution, doesn't fight back, doesn't persecute back because I've been persecuted. I'm going to live differently, and that is going to be... make us the crown of Christ's.
Yeah, we don't get to choose the trial. We get to choose how we act within the trial.
Boom. I like it. We don't get to choose the trial. We get to choose how we act in the trial.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
And there's freedom in that.
There's huge freedom in it. And that's what will make us more like Christ. And ultimately, it will bring about change. As we record this, there's been all the hoorah about the opening games, the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, and all kinds of different perspectives on it, and persecution, blah, 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 blah. But I heard one of the most profound comments I heard was simply that if we bite back, if we fight back, we actually perpetually feed the hatred, and it gets the result that people were looking for and all that sort of stuff. But if we can take James literally, we can acknowledge, I don't like that. I don't believe in that. I don't agree with that, perhaps. However, I'm going to not repay evil with evil, but repay evil with good. That's Peter who says that, not James. But we actually can arrest the process, the downward spiral, by acting in a different spirit.
Yeah. I've got to show you this thing. Okay, put your hand up against mine.
Right.
Okay, now push really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, feel that tension.
Yes.
Push as hard as you can.
Yep.
Right? That's really hard.
Yep.
But now what happens if I do this?
Oh, yes. Going to give way.
She
pulled her hand away
pull
very
my
quickly.
hand away. If I just
thrust forward. Nearly knocked the microphone.
But you could see that on YouTube. But do you see what I'm saying there? Just that slight example shows you two tensions against each other. If one relaxes, the other one has to stop.
Yeah, you have to stop fighting. And that's exactly, I think, that's actually what the gospel's about. That's what Jesus does when he doesn't fight back, when he's silent before a lamb before their shearer is silent. I think that's the message for the gospel. And it's not being unfaithful to Jesus to live that kind of life in the face of persecution. James will tell us it's actually the right way to live. It actually silences arguments. It actually builds respect. It takes the pressure out of the pushing. As long as we push back, we're constantly facing resistance.
Yeah.
Another comment I heard is Jesus doesn't need us to defend him.
No, he doesn't.
Because Jesus has already willingly suffered the worst of persecution. He has taken it upon himself, so we don't need to defend him in our faith. We need to represent him well in love.
Yeah, and you don't need to defend him because he's too busy defending you.
Yeah, I like it. Boom. That's right. Exactly. We can't do that as well as Jesus can do that. So let's just represent him through the way we conduct ourselves, which is all the things we're going to read about in these coming chapters.
Yeah. Oh, it's like as well, if you keep adding fuel to the fire, you just get a bigger fire.
Yes. Yep, totally. It's the whole perpetuation of anger. And Jesus isn't about that.
Yeah.
Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Peter says it, but overcome evil with good.
And going back to worrying in the moment, you can actually make your troubles bigger by constantly worrying about them.
Yeah, same principle.
Yeah.
Yeah, where if we can stand our ground and go, Lord, I'm going to give this to Jesus. I'm going to give this over to you. We can quench the fire of worry, to mix those metaphors together.
Yeah. You're good with
Silence
metaphors.
Silence the rough seas that were tossing us around.
Yes.
if we just trust that Jesus is walking on the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to keep reading here.
Keep going.
So 19...
This is going to be a long one because she hasn't done any work for chapters 2 to 5, so that'll be a bit quicker.
Actually, my computer screen's gone blank now.
Oh,
I
no.
have no further notes.
Okay.
Okay, post this at... Oh, I can't read. Post this at all the intersections, dear friends. Lead with your ears, follow up with your tongue, and let your anger straggle along in the rear. God's righteousness doesn't grow from human anger, so throw all spoiled virtue and cancerous evil in the garbage. In simple humility, let our gardener God landscape you with the word, making a salvation garden of your life.
I can't even follow what that is saying in the NLT version, but I just sit back and just enjoy that.
It's funny.
It's a bit of rich literature there.
What does it say in yours?
What version did you start? What verse did you start with?
Just start with verse 20. Or
20.
give me 21.
21 says, so get rid of all filth and evil in your lives and humbly accept the word that God has planted in your hearts, for it has the power to save your souls. But don't just listen to God's word. You do what it says. Did you read that one, verse 22 as well? Yeah. No, you just read. No. So, yeah, I like the way you said talk about planting there.
Let our gardener God landscape you with the word, making a salvation garden of your life.
Yep.
I like the idea here that the idea of the word landscaping you, like that this actual book you can read
Yes.
changes you.
Yes, and he'll go on and say that. Verse 23, he says, for if you listen to the word and don't obey it, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror, forgetting what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God will bless you. That kind of reminds me of Jesus' summary at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. The one who does my words is like a one who plants their house on the rock and not on the sand. It's that same principle that there's a sense in which the law is a mirror that we look at. The word of God is a mirror that we can look at, which reflects back who we are, and it also reflects back where we're not who we should be.
Yes.
It does both those things, and if we continue to allow it to do that, we are conformed into his image. And so we should look at this and go, hey, if I'm repaying anger for anger, is that the right thing to do? Or is that actually me giving into my selfish desires? Even if I've convinced myself I'm defending Jesus, well, I've got to go, Jesus doesn't need my defense. That's not what the scriptures tell me to do. The scriptures tell me to repay evil with good.
Is this a good time to remember verses and say them over and over to yourself?
Heck yeah.
Yeah? Like
Yeah.
what verse would you pick if you're in deep persecution?
If I'm in deep persecution from others, I would often say to myself that, this is just spitballing off the top of my head, I often think of Jesus in those situations. Jesus, as a lamb before the shearers, Isaiah 53, was silent, so he did not open his mouth. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Jesus says, Peter says, overcome evil with good. There's just a few I would use. I've already used a couple of those already in the podcast. They're the sort of things I would use to try to allow the word to shape me into what is the right response that I should have from persecution. And I don't think I will find Christ encouraging me to fight back, stand up. It seems like the gospel and the words of Christ demand of me to do exactly the opposite to that. So that's how I would face persecution.
Okay, I think that's very wise. I can learn from that. What if I was going along and I'm on my morning run and I'm stressed about stuff and I'm like, oh, that's really bad in my life. This is really horrible. What if, and is it appropriate for me to, instead of worrying, to say over and over in my mind, God is my strength and refuge?
I love that. Yep.
Can you do those kind of things?
Good, very good.
Is that like landscaping your garden?
That's landscaping the garden. That's I heard someone say it years ago, if you work the word will work for you.
What?
If you work the word will work for you.
Okay.
So you're working the word there. You're putting the word to work in your life by applying the promises of God.
Okay. All right.
Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and thanksgiving, I present my request to you. I go to that one often because I often get anxious. I get stressed about not seeing the breakthrough. And I come back to that and go, everything inside me wants to be stressed and anxious right now. But Lord, Paul says that I can trust that I don't need to be. Do not be anxious, but in everything with prayer and thanksgiving. So I'll move straight to, okay, that's a formula. I'm going to have to move to thanksgiving. Even though I don't feel like Thanksgiving right now, I'm going to do that.
That's keeping your eye on the prize.
That's keeping your eye on the prize. And the thing is, that's what brings about the change.
So at 3 a.m., if I'm worried And if I say, what verse did you say? Do
was
not be
Philippians 4.
anxious. No, do not be anxious because God.
Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, with prayer and thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And then it goes on and says, and the God of peace will be with you, and the God that surpasses understanding will be with you, and guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus.
Okay, so if I said that at 3 a.m. instead of going through the long list of things that are coming against me, do you think that would bring me peace in the moment?
I think yes, it can, but I also think that this is a principle that takes time. This is the renewal of your mind that Romans 12 talks about. Do not be conformed to the image or the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Neurologists now know the importance of neural pathways. So the more we confess God's word over the natural worrisome response, the more we're actually not only are we seeing it accessing a supernatural power, but we're actually changing the way we think. We're renewing our mind.
We're working the word.
We're working the word. So that what happens is it becomes over time more natural to actually go down the path of faith than the path of worry. It doesn't mean we'll always get it right, but it becomes easier over time because the word is now cultivating that garden in us. So there's more of the word in us, which enables us to more quickly go to that as opposed to the path of worry or fear.
And if James is sort of like Proverbs here, do you think James is pointing back to those scriptures in this moment, saying like, think about the word there, work the word, look at Proverbs, which has a lot of these life instructions,
yes, it does, yeah.
And remember those in those moments.
Yeah, remember those and seek to apply those to your life. Yeah, I think that's where he's going. So this is a lot about how to live wisely as a Christian.
And practically.
Practical. It's very practical.
Think those things.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It makes sense to me.
That's why I love James, because it's just lots of practical Christianity.
Oh, here it says, act on what you hear. Those who hear and don't act are like those who glance in the mirror. As you just said,
yeah.
Walk away and 2 minutes later have no idea who they are, what they look like.
Yep.
So act on the word. So if I start saying to myself, I am a child of God, I am a child of God, as I look at myself, eventually I will start to see myself
That's right.
as what God sees me as, a child of God.
Yeah. And that is
It's really
spiritual
working the
and
word.
natural. It's working the word. And there's a principle to it that is spiritual, in that we are created like God with the power, or life and death is in the power of the tongue. I think it's Proverbs. Life and death is in the power of the tongue. There is,
Which is what he talks
James
about
is going to
again.
talk about
Yeah.
later on in the book. So there's power when we shape things spiritually and naturally with our speech. If we are always shaping, life sucks, life's hard for me. I'm not advocating for a lack of honesty or a lack of authenticity here. I think, and that's where hyperfaith movement has got it wrong. We dismiss or disregard our feelings completely. I'm not saying don't be authentic, but I think it's more a but God. It's, yes, this is hard, but God is on my side. So that is enables us to be authentic, and then to move to a place of trusting that even though I'm authentically feeling a certain way and my circumstances are certainly very challenging, but God is on my side, but God will come through, but God has a plan, and then begin to confess that. That's the confession of faith that James is talking about in James 1 here.
Okay, so if I'm growing in my faith, if I'm looking in that mirror and I say, I feel like crap, I don't look anything like a child of God, but God says I do look like a child of God, so I need to keep focusing on that.
Yes. Yep. Keep
All right.
focusing on what God
Just
says.
simplifying it.
It is. I like the way you simplify, and that's not rocket science. It's working the word. It takes time.
Whoever catches a glimpse of the revealed counsel of God in verse 25, the free life, even out of the corner of his eye, and sticks with it. Whoever catches it is no distracted scatterbrain, but a man or woman of action. That person will find delight and affirmation in the action. Anyone who sets himself up as religious by taking a good name is self-deceived. This kind of religion is hot air and only hot air. Real religion, the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this: reach out to the homeless and loveless in their plight and guard against corruption from the godless world. He brings it back to the natural there, doesn't he?
Right back to the practical. You can have all the religion in the world, but if you can't control the way you speak, if you aren't living a life that values the poor, the orphan, as he says there in those versions, the vulnerable, those that are weak, which you'll come back to as well. If you can't live a life that values those people and that way of life, the religion you have is worthless. It's not going to wash.
It's not going to wash. What do you mean by that?
That's a bad choice of word. It's not going to it's not going to last. Let's just go with it. It's not going to last. It's not going to give the result that you want.
Okay.
It's going to come up short. That kind of religion will come up short, even though it might look like on the outside you're going all pious and you're all going through the motions. But if your heart isn't pure, if your tongue isn't controlled, if you're acting out of anger, if you're got all these other things he'll address, you're appreciating the rich at the expense of the poor. He says that kind of religion, he says in this version, is worthless.
He ends it there on sort of a very strict. It sounds strict in a way. No, maybe that I just used the wrong word too.
No, he's very blunt.
He's blunt. That's better.
He's
blunt.
He's quite directive with how to behave as a Christian. And I think it's good for us because sometimes we look the part, but we're not really doing the things. We don't walk the walk. We don't talk the talk.
Yeah, because this is what I think when I read this is I'm looking in the mirror trying to convince myself to realize that I am a child of God. And then it's like, oh, well, hang on a minute. I actually have to go and do something now.
Yeah.
I was enjoying seeing myself in a new light.
See.
And now I'm actually confronted with the fact, I don't actually really look after the poor or I don't really guard myself against corruption. So there's things
that need to be done.
In that reflection that I need to change. Yeah.
But that's not wrong. I think the fact that you've looked in the mirror is actually what has brought you to the realization. You've looked into peered into the perfect law of God, he said here. You've peered into that and you've gone, oh, that's who I'm supposed to be. I'm not living up to that. That's the kind of way we should examine and use the scriptures. It's nothing wrong with that. It's a good way to do it. It doesn't cease to, it doesn't unvalidate. Is that a word, unvalidate?
No, just use
we'll go
it
with
today.
That. It doesn't unvalidate who God says you are, that you are a child of God. But what it does is says, Jeanie, you're a child of God. Now, because you're a child of God, go and live this way. You are a person of faith. Now, because you're a person of faith, let your works, which we'll come to in the next episode, let your works prove that you're a child of God.
So this book isn't just instructions. It is ultimately a book or a letter, rather, designed to change your life from the inside, intrinsically. Yeah,
intrinsically.
Intrinsically, change me from the inside. So my faith is actually lived out as works.
Yes. God changes on the inside and it flows out to the outside.
Got it. That's
how
chapter
it is.
1
Live
for me.
like a Christian. All right.
Yeah.
That's chapter 1. We'll talk to you on the next episode, chapter 2. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And you can also find us on all the socials. Just search The Bible. Wait, what? And to find out more about our church, just search C3 Camden, C3 Picton, or C3 Thirroul on the web or on the socials. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode of The Bible. Wait, what?